Welcome to Pigeon Healthy. You can feed the best diet, give perfect water, control parasites, do everything right, but if your loft ventilation is wrong, your birds will get sick and die. Respiratory disease will be constant. Performance will be poor. Breeding will fail. Young birds will die in waves. And you won't understand why because you're doing everything else correctly. The problem is ventilation, and 90% of keepers get it completely wrong. They either have too little ventilation, creating a toxic, humid, disease-breeding environment, or they have too much ventilation creating drafts that chill birds and cause illness. Getting ventilation right is the single most important aspect of loft design, yet it's the most misunderstood and poorly executed. Today I'm going to teach you the science of proper loft ventilation. What it is, why it matters, how to calculate the exact ventilation your loft needs, the difference between ventilation and drafts, common ventilation mistakes that kill birds, and how to design or retrofit your loft for perfect air exchange. This is engineering combined with biology, and when you get it right, your birds will transform. Respiratory disease will virtually disappear. Feathers will be perfect. Performance will soar. Breeding success will increase. And you'll wonder how you ever kept birds without proper ventilation. Let's start with what ventilation actually does. Ventilation is the controlled exchange of indoor air with fresh outdoor air. It serves four critical functions. First, oxygen replenishment and carbon dioxide removal. Birds breathe in oxygen and exhale carbon dioxide. In an enclosed loft, oxygen levels drop and CO2 builds up. High CO2 causes lethargy, poor performance, and chronic stress. Ventilation brings in fresh oxygen and removes CO2. Second, moisture removal. Birds produce massive amounts of moisture through respiration and droppings. A single pigeon exhales about 50 milliliters of water per day as vapor. 20 birds produce a liter of moisture daily. This moisture saturates the air, condenses on walls, and creates damp conditions where mold, bacteria, and respiratory pathogens thrive. Ventilation removes moist air and replaces it with drier outdoor air. Third, ammonia and odor removal. Bird droppings produce ammonia gas, which is toxic to respiratory tissues. Ammonia burns the lungs and sinuses, causing chronic inflammation and making birds susceptible to infections. A properly ventilated loft has no ammonia smell. If you smell ammonia when you enter your loft, ventilation is inadequate and your birds are being poisoned. And fourth, temperature regulation. Ventilation helps moderate loft temperature. In summer it removes hot air. In winter, it prevents overheating from too much insulation. Proper ventilation maintains a comfortable temperature range year-round. Now let's discuss the difference between ventilation and drafts, because this is where most keepers go wrong. Ventilation is the gentle, continuous exchange of air throughout the entire loft space. It's air movement you barely notice, but it constantly refreshes the atmosphere. Drafts are fast-moving currents of cold air that hit birds directly. Drafts cause chilling, stress, and respiratory infections. You can have excellent ventilation with zero drafts, and that's the goal. The mistake keepers make is thinking that ventilation means cutting holes everywhere and letting wind blow through the loft. That creates drafts, not ventilation. Birds huddle, get chilled, and get sick. The keeper then blocks all the openings to stop drafts, but now there's no ventilation. The air becomes stagnant, humid, and ammonia-filled. Birds get respiratory disease from the toxic air. The keeper is confused because they tried ventilation and it made things worse. The solution is understanding proper ventilation design. You need inlet vents low on the walls and outlet vents high near the roof. Fresh air enters low, circulates through the loft, picks up moisture and ammonia, and exits high. This is called the stack effect or chimney effect. Warm air rises naturally, so contaminated warm air rises to the high vents and escapes. Cool fresh air enters low, warms as it circulates, rises and exits. This creates continuous gentle airflow without drafts hitting birds. The key is that inlets and outlets must be positioned correctly and sized correctly. Here's the formula for calculating ventilation needs. You need a specific amount of air exchange per hour based on the number of birds and loft volume. The minimum ventilation rate for pigeons is 4 to 6 air changes per hour during normal conditions, meaning the entire volume of air in the loft is completely replaced 4 to 6 times every hour. During hot weather or with high bird density, you need 8 to 12 air changes per hour. Let me give you a calculation example. Suppose your loft is 3 meters long, 2 meters wide, and 2.5 meters high. Volume equals length times width times height, so 3 times 2 times 2.5 equals 15 cubic meters. You have 30 birds in this loft. For minimum ventilation you need 6 air changes per hour. That means 60 cubic meters of fresh air per hour, calculated as 6 times 15. To achieve this with natural ventilation, you need appropriately sized inlet and outlet vents. The general rule is that the total area of outlet vents should equal approximately 1% of the floor area, and inlet vents should be slightly larger, about 1.2% of floor area, to ensure good airflow. Floor area in our example is 3 times 2 equals 6 square meters. 1% of 6 square meters is 0.06 square meters, which equals 600 square centimeters. So you need about 600 square centimeters of outlet vent area, which could be 3 vents of 200 square centimeters each, positioned high near the roof peak. Inlet vents should be 1.2% of floor area, which is 720 square centimeters. This could be 4 vents of 180 square centimeters each, positioned low on opposite walls. These vents should have adjustable covers or louvers so you can control airflow based on weather and season. This is natural ventilation driven by temperature difference and wind. It works well in most climates and is the traditional method. For lofts in extreme climates, very hot or very cold, or lofts with high bird density, mechanical ventilation using fans may be necessary to achieve adequate air exchange. Now let's discuss common ventilation mistakes. The first mistake is no ventilation. The loft is essentially sealed with tiny cracks as the only air exchange. This is common in converted sheds or garages. The air becomes toxic within hours. Birds suffer chronically. Some keepers think tight lofts are warmer and better for birds. Wrong. Birds generate heat. Even in winter, an unventilated loft becomes stuffy and humid. The second mistake is ventilation only at one level, usually high vents only or low vents only. This doesn't create proper circulation. You need both high outlets and low inlets for the stack effect to work. High vents only means fresh air has no entry point. Low vents only means contaminated air has no exit. Third mistake is vents positioned to create drafts. If you put vents directly across from each other on opposite walls and birds roost in between, wind blows straight through and hits the birds. This is a draft, not ventilation. Vents should be offset so air circulates around the loft but doesn't blow directly on birds. Fourth mistake is undersized vents. Tiny vents don't allow enough airflow. People are afraid of drafts so they make vents too small. Calculate proper vent size based on loft volume and bird numbers. Fifth mistake is vents that can't be adjusted. Weather changes. In winter you need less ventilation than summer. Vents should have adjustable covers so you can increase or decrease airflow as needed. Fixed vents can't adapt to changing conditions. Sixth mistake is ignoring humidity. Even with ventilation, if your loft has a dirt floor or leaky roof, moisture is constantly added faster than ventilation can remove it. Fix moisture sources first, then ventilate. And seventh mistake is confusing air movement with ventilation. Some keepers put a fan in the loft and think that's ventilation. If the fan just circulates the same contaminated air, it's not ventilating. Ventilation requires fresh air input and contaminated air output. A fan can help distribute air, but it doesn't replace the need for proper vents. Let me describe proper ventilation design step by step. For a typical backyard loft, here's what you do. Install ridge vents or gable vents at the highest point of the roof. Ridge vents run along the roof peak and allow warm moist air to escape continuously. Gable vents are openings in the triangular wall sections at each end of a peaked roof. These should be large, at least 200 to 300 square centimeters each, and covered with wire mesh to prevent predators and birds from entering. Install soffit vents or low wall vents near the floor on opposite walls. These allow fresh air to enter. Position them so incoming air doesn't blow directly on perches. You want air to enter, sweep across the floor, rise as it warms, and exit high. Each inlet vent should be 150 to 200 square centimeters and covered with adjustable louvers. Ensure vents are opposite each other to create crossflow. If your loft is rectangular, put inlets on the 2 long walls and outlets high on the ends or roof. This creates circulation from one side to the other and bottom to top. Add adjustable covers to all vents. In summer, open them fully. In winter, partially close them to reduce airflow but never fully close. Even in freezing weather, you need some ventilation. Completely sealed lofts in winter become humid and ammonia-filled. Use wire mesh over all vents to prevent predators, wild birds, and pests from entering. 1/4-inch or 1/2-inch mesh works well. Consider adding a whirlybird or turbine vent on the roof. These are spinning vents that use wind to create suction, pulling air out of the loft. They're very effective for increasing airflow. And if you have a large loft or live in a hot climate, consider adding an exhaust fan high in the loft. A small fan on a timer can run during the hottest part of the day to boost air exchange. The fan pulls contaminated air out and fresh air is drawn in through the lower vents. This is mechanical ventilation and it's very effective in challenging conditions. Let's talk about seasonal ventilation adjustments. In summer, you want maximum ventilation. Open all vents fully. The goal is to remove heat and moisture as fast as possible. If temperatures are extreme, add fans or misting systems to help cool the loft. In winter, reduce ventilation but never eliminate it. Partially close vents to reduce cold drafts but keep some airflow. You still need to remove moisture and ammonia. Many keepers make the mistake of sealing the loft tight in winter to keep it warm. This creates a humid, ammonia-filled environment. Birds get respiratory infections from the toxic air, not from cold temperatures. Pigeons tolerate cold very well as long as the air is dry and clean. In spring and fall, adjust vents based on daily weather. You want comfortable temperatures and fresh air. Now let me share case studies. A racing loft had chronic respiratory problems. Every season, multiple birds developed sneezing, nasal discharge, and eye problems. The keeper treated with antibiotics repeatedly. Symptoms improved during treatment but returned within weeks. I visited the loft. It was a converted garage with a single small window for ventilation. The air was thick with ammonia smell. Humidity was visible as condensation on the walls. I explained that the loft had essentially no ventilation. We designed a proper system, installed a ridge vent along the entire roof peak, added 4 low wall vents with adjustable louvers, and installed a whirlybird vent. Within 2 weeks of completing the ventilation upgrades, the respiratory symptoms in most birds cleared without medication. The ammonia smell disappeared. The walls dried out. The following racing season, respiratory disease was minimal. A few birds had minor symptoms early season, treated quickly, and no widespread problems. The keeper said it was the healthiest his birds had ever been. The difference was ventilation. The toxic air had been causing chronic respiratory inflammation that made birds susceptible to every pathogen. Clean air allowed their respiratory systems to heal and stay healthy. Another case involved a breeding loft with terrible fertility and high squab mortality. Eggs were fertile but many embryos died in the shell. Squabs that hatched often died within the first week. The keeper suspected disease, genetics, nutrition, everything. I visited. The loft was well built and clean, but ventilation was poor. There was one high vent and no low vents. The air was stale and humid. I suspected that high CO2 levels were affecting embryo development and that humidity was promoting bacterial growth that killed squabs. We installed proper low intake vents and increased the high vent size. We added a small exhaust fan on a timer to boost airflow during the day. The next breeding season, embryo death dropped dramatically. Hatch rates improved from about 50% to over 80%. Squab survival in the first week went from 60% to 95%. The breeder was amazed. Same pairs, same feed, same management. The only change was ventilation. Better air quality improved embryo oxygen supply and reduced bacterial loads, allowing eggs to hatch and squabs to survive. A third case was a young bird loft with high mortality during the death window. 6 to 10-week-old birds kept dying. The keeper suspected disease and treated for everything. Some birds survived, but losses were always 20 to 30%. The loft was a tight, insulated building designed to be warm. Ventilation was minimal. The humidity inside was extreme. Droppings never dried. Everything was damp. This created perfect conditions for coccidia, bacteria, and respiratory pathogens. We completely redesigned ventilation with multiple high and low vents. We also improved drainage so droppings would dry faster. The next year, young bird mortality dropped to under 5%. The dry, well-ventilated environment prevented the disease explosions that had been killing birds. Again, ventilation was the key factor. These cases demonstrate that ventilation is not optional. It's foundational. Without it, everything else fails. With it, birds thrive even under challenging conditions. Here's your action plan. First, assess your current loft ventilation. Can you smell ammonia when you enter? Are walls damp or moldy? Do birds have chronic respiratory issues? If yes, ventilation is inadequate. Second, calculate your loft volume and bird numbers. Use the formula I provided to determine how much ventilation you need. Third, inspect existing vents. Are they sized correctly? Positioned correctly with high outlets and low inlets? Adjustable? If not, plan upgrades. Fourth, install proper ventilation following the design principles I described. This may require cutting new vent holes, installing ridge vents, adding louvers, or installing fans. It's a one-time investment that pays off forever. Fifth, monitor results. After improving ventilation, watch for changes. Respiratory disease should decrease. Ammonia smell should disappear. Humidity should drop. Birds should be more active and healthy. And sixth, adjust vents seasonally. More open in summer, partially closed in winter, but never fully sealed. Ventilation is the invisible foundation of a healthy loft. You can't see air quality, but your birds feel it every moment. Good air keeps them healthy, poor air makes them sick. It's that simple. If you've been struggling with chronic health problems, poor performance, or unexplained losses, and you haven't addressed ventilation, that's your problem. Fix it and watch everything improve. The investment is modest, a few $100s for materials and a weekend of work, but the return is enormous. Healthier birds, better performance, less disease, lower medication costs, higher breeding success. Every aspect improves. If this video convinces you that ventilation matters and you upgrade your loft, please share it. Most keepers don't understand ventilation and their birds suffer for it. Your sharing could save birds' lives and transform someone's results. Comment about your loft ventilation setup and whether you've had problems related to poor air quality. And subscribe to Pigeon Healthy for foundational information that solves real problems, not just treats symptoms. Thank you for watching. Fix your ventilation and give your birds the clean air they need to thrive.